Welcome to IMDb. I am Brenton, joined as always by Danielle.
That's me.
And a special welcome to our guest this week, host of the Based on a True Story podcast, Dan LeFebvre.
Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
If you're not aware, Based on a True Story compares history with Hollywood's version of history. And you break down the film and aim to find out how historically accurate it is, isn't that right?
Yes.
What's the latest episode that's up at the moment? Is it Bohemian Rhapsody?
JFK is actually the latest one.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that one. I've heard it's not that accurate. How was it?
Well, that all depends on what you believe. There's so many different versions of the story of JFK's assassination. But the movie itself follows one particular storyline, so it doesn't get into, all the different types of conspiracies and things like that. It just follows one of them. So I tried to stay as true to that and kind of block out all the other stuff, but also, recognizing that it's there, but, this is what we're here to do, is to talk about this movie, not everything under the sun. That can't be done in a single episode.
Yeah, you'd be there for days.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch it, because we recently watched that 11/22/63.
Have you heard of that one?
Yes, the Stephen King.
Yeah. Which is an interesting take on the whole thing. No, I haven't.
The book is a lot better.
Okay.
It's usually the way it is, but there's a lot of stuff that they left out of the series. I thought that if you read the book, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's why they did that in the series, or that's why this happened, but they didn't really explain a lot of it.
I'll have to do that, because I'm a fan of Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for joining us this week as we count up the IMDb's best movies of all time and discuss some of the greatest films you mightn't ever have seen. This week, rated as number 6 on the Internet Movie Database by millions of film lovers from around the world, is Schindler's List. Released in 1993, starring Liam Neeson as the lead, with Ralph Fiennes and Ben Kingsley, Schindler's List is a historical war epic set in Krakow, Poland during the Holocaust, opening in 1939. Based on the Thomas Keneally novel Schindler's Ark, the film is produced and directed by Steven Spielberg. Now, we're not going to go into much of a spoiler-free zone here, but we are assuming that you at least know the story behind this one. And the reason that we have Dan with us today is because this is an important movie. And Dan, you do a lot more research into these things than us. I can't imagine how much work that must be.
It's a lot of work.
How much research and reading do you usually do behind one of these episodes?
It varies depending on, of course, the episode or the movie itself, and really because I try to follow the movie's timeline, and some movies are a lot closer than others, and so some of them it's easier to that didn't happen, versus nitpicking on some of the details. But typically, it'll probably take me about 20 to 25 hours to get an episode created. And that I use my commute time to and from work to listen to audiobooks and use that as research as well. So that time isn't really counted in there, but it's a lot of work for a podcast that bounces around from topic to topic, but it's not nearly as much as, some people dedicate their entire lives to a single topic, especially, one like this, like with Schindler's List. There's people that have spent decades and decades researching things, and there's no way that I could do that for a single episode. And so that's why I try to kind of give just enough that hopefully somebody listening will want to dig in and learn more on their own, and give them some resources to start to dig in on their own a little bit more. Yeah,
definitely. I really like how you do less further readings and things. In your episodes, to people to go do their own research and not just take someone's one stance on it and what they've looked into it. Value. Because that's never really a good idea when people just take one person's opinion, even if it is a resourceful one off the internet or what have you. I find most movies that are based on a true story are either they change things that is completely fair enough for a movie. You got to do it just to put it on film. And then there's the movie that just changed everything, and then it's got nothing to do with the original story. Yeah. So there's either one or the other usually. So My impression of Schindler's List when it comes to the historical accuracy is that first one, where it's pretty much along the lines. It's pretty accurate, definitely in spirit, and I think that's definitely the point. You wouldn't want to over fictionalize anything. And Spielberg's obviously a Jewish man; he's very important to him.
I think he definitely would have done his best to make sure that this was as accurate as possible.
Well, he had the actual Schindler Jews probably working with the film.
That was so cool that he had them at the end there.
Yeah, that was a really cool, nice touch at the end there. How many times have you seen this?
Oh gosh, probably at least a dozen times by now.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's one that obviously I watched it a lot for research, but even just before and then prepping for this as well, and it's one of those that it's a movie, and so it's hard to it's entertainment in that way, because movies and films can be entertainment in that way, but it's also it's very touching. It's one of those things that it's a part of history, and it's something that I don't think we should forget.
Yeah, I think it's a very good movie, and I would recommend it to everyone, but it's not something that I would ever see myself really running in to watch again anytime soon, because it is a hard watch.
They're heavy.
It is.
I'm like that with most war movies, right around Remembrance Day when they're all on TV and stuff. I'll make sure I'll sit myself down and watch them, but again, like they're not ones I tend to watch just because, but I do watch them because I think it's important to remember. And if I'm uncomfortable for that 2 hours, well, that's nothing compared to what those people went through. So that's kind of why I tend to like to watch those sort of things, because I think it's important.
So most of this movie is in black and white, which I think was a very good point on Spielberg. Why do you think that he did it?
Well, because it kind of, for an audience in contemporary times, it kind of puts you in that mindset that this was back then. This is something in the past.
Yeah, it makes it seem like you're almost looking at reality.
Yeah, and I think too, it was a time that was very devoid of anything joyful, and color kind of conveys that. So I think it portrays the solemnness very well to make that directorial decision.
And speaking about the color, I just wanted to bring up the girl in the red.
Yeah. Which
is one of the only uses of color in the whole movie. And I believe that Schindler actually did see a girl in red. Like, that was actually a real thing that he noted down.
Yes, it was.
I think that was just a really cool way that he used it. The use of color.
Powerful.
Not only as a storytelling technique, but as just a film effect is the word I was looking for.
Because it was just so easy to follow her in that scene because of it, right?
And then you got that nice music playing, which is just juxtaposing with what's happening.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it was a good choice on his part also, because you could follow her through the streets, right? You could see exactly where she was going. He made it very easy for the audience to see exactly what Schindler was seeing. And then later on in the movie, with the mass grave scene, that's what made it so powerful, is that because you were so easily able to notice her, immediately you know who that is, and that's why it makes it so touching.
Yeah, it was interesting. There's actually a woman who, when she watched that movie, she recognized that was herself. She wrote a book, if you get a chance to read it. It's called The Girl in the Red Coat.
Oh, wow.
Roma Ligoka, I believe is her name, if I pronounced that correctly. She kind of recalls what it was like as the little girl in the red coat. Of course, we're seeing everything from Schindler's perspective, and so it's not like we know 100% for sure that actually was her. There was another a man that mentioned that he had given his daughter a red coat, and so maybe that was his daughter. Dr. Martin Foldy, I believe, was his name. So we don't really obviously know for sure, but it's just fascinating that, as you mentioned, it stands out, and people have connected to that, even just in watching the movie and connecting back to what it was like to be there.
Absolutely. No, that's so interesting. I had no idea that those books existed. And And I totally agree with you. I think it's fantastic that, that it was an opportunity for the people involved to be able to connect back and, further share their stories of what happened with everybody in the world who watched it. I think that's great that they were able to do that.
Towards the beginning of the movie, because obviously this is a movie mostly about how Oskar Schindler interacted with these particular Jews and the whole process of the Holocaust, because it starts in 39 and goes through to 45. So it shows you when they first get taken to the ghetto and then they get taken to...
It's the whole process of what they went through
the
whole war. Yeah.
So for almost most of the movie, Oskar doesn't seem like he's the one really doing much. Like, he's very accepting of it and profiting from it, because obviously almost no one knew what was actually happening.
Well, and I kept asking you, Tim, like, has he clued in yet?
Yeah. Well, for the long term, it seemed like it was Itzhak Stern that really was the one saving the Jews for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And it seemed like, was it the liquidation of the ghetto, or was it the burning that really changed Oscar's mind?
It was the liquidation. I mean, from his recollections, like, that was when watching that and seeing the little girl in the red coat and just watching that happen on mass scale was when it really hit him that the incidents that he had seen previously were not isolated incidents. These are not things that just are kind of one-offs and just soldiers being brutal and that regard, but this is a systematic thing. And that was really what changed him. Yeah,
because he did see quite a lot of brutality from the guards towards the Jews, but he was just thinking that it was sort of just one-off stuff. Is that right?
I think it was easy to say that it was one-off stuff. He was really focused on... He was a businessman. He was honestly, he was just focused on making money.
Yeah.
And, granted, at some point, you would expect that there would be something that would click when you're hiring Jews for practically slave labor. And, it didn't click then. He was just there to make money. But, one thing after another, it was just real easy to kind of turn a blind eye, for lack of a better term, up until he actually saw that liquidation of the ghetto there, where it was just, what are we doing? And that was kind of a turning point for him. And that was really when he made that decision internally. We don't know what went through his head, but that was kind of a turning point for him during the war.
I imagine it would be like that for a lot of Germans, where they would just turn a blind eye to what the army was doing because they didn't really realize it. And then when they did, a lot of them would have been powerless, but because he had this system set up and he was a very wealthy businessman, he wasn't powerless. So he had more... Like, I imagine there's a lot of Germans in that situation who wanted to do a lot.
Well, and you've got to remember also that for... I don't know if it was the entire decade before the war, but it definitely for the time that Hitler was in power before the war, there was a systematic policy of racism put in place in Germany, where in schools they were teaching children how to recognize Jews, and that, everything that was wrong with the German economy was because of the Jews, which it wasn't. It was actually because of the reparations payments they had to pay from World War I. But you see in the movie a lot of times where, there's a little kid standing outside the train and he does the whole, thing.
Because they're heading to Auschwitz.
Because they're heading to Auschwitz. Or, there's the little girl in the street when they're putting them on the train after the liquidation. Like, go away, Jews, go away. Like, they taught them in school that they were the cause of every problem in Germany. So, as much as you think, yeah, there were people who wanted to help, there were a lot of people who honestly thought that these people weren't human, and that they were just animals who were the cause of the problems of everything.
See, when we watched the burning of the bodies scene last night, and you said, how did the guards just go through with this? You know what I mean? Like, how did you think that what you're doing is right? And you kind of just answered your own question there.
Yeah.
If you've just got amazing propaganda and brainwashing to convince these people, like, it still amazes me looking at films like this, that this is something that happened quite recently too. Like, this is honestly, in my opinion, the closest thing to hell on earth.
Yeah.
And this film it really highlights it better than any other portrayal that I've ever seen.
And something that really touched me, I think, was that I think Spielberg really captured how blasé some of these guards could be, that it was funny to them. It was entertainment to them to do this, because you look at it and I'm like, but that's a person. But then you remember they didn't think they were people, you know?
I wonder how many stories they actually got from talking to the Schindler Jews. I imagine that they would have, and just asked what was the experience like.
Do you have any insight on that, Dan?
I mean, there were some that definitely helped with the film. I'm not sure exactly how much they relied on that versus, it was from Schindler's
Documented
perspective
stuff,
telling the story. So, it was kind of a mixture of that, I would assume. I'm not sure exactly what the percentage would be on that. But the other part of that too, that, the people that were there, there's so many different versions of that story for the same thing happening. So you have, the people going through and living that hell day by day. And then you have that's going to be one version of the story. And then you have the soldiers that are perpetrating that and doing that. And, we know from the trials at Nuremberg, they were pretty much just, we were just following orders. We were just doing what we were told to do and trying to make it seem like it wasn't that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have, with Schindler being kind of an outsider. I mean, he was a member of the Nazi Party, and so not really an outsider in that way, but he wasn't, one of the soldiers there. He wasn't one of the victims there either. And so it kind of feels weird to say this, but his perspective may be one of the least one of the most unbiased. I mean, I don't know that there's a way to have an unbiased perspective for something like this. But you think about just, from human memory isn't that great. And so at least Schindler could write things down or, be able to consistently do that, to have some sort of a log and have something that might be a little more
documented.
I want to say fact-based, but,
Yeah.
in that way, it feels weird to say that because they're all valid perspectives.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
It's, yeah.
Do you think if you were just a random, average German soldier, would you be tried for war crimes afterwards if you're just following orders?
That's I mean, have you read much about the trials at Nuremberg?
No, I haven't.
If you get a chance, I'll have to send you the link after. I can't remember that. There's a book. It's like audiobook is like 50 hours long or something. So it's incredible. But it's all about the trials at Nuremberg, and that was the primary defense for a lot of the soldiers. A lot of they mostly tried officers and ones giving commands, but all the way. I mean, even those giving commands would say they were just following orders.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, the buck stops here, but when Hitler himself is no longer in the picture, then it's easy to just say, well, it wasn't me. I was just told to do it by this guy who's not here anymore. They, of course, didn't, depending on who the person was, and, some people got more time than others. Some people were executed and, for war crimes. The average German soldier, it's one of those things that what would be recompense for something like that, where you are following orders. If you don't do it, then, they might kill you. Who knows? After the war, there were a lot of members of the Nazi Party that feared for their own lives. And if they didn't follow orders, then they or their families would basically be silenced or killed. Mm-hmm. And so it's just one of those situations that it's I can't even fathom what it would be like and what sort of decision process you would go through. It's, would you do something so horrible if you knew that was the only way that your family was going to survive? And some people were put in that position, and not trying to justify it by any means, but it's just one of those things. I don't think I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know. It's just tough.
Something that keeps coming into my mind is, what was that study? The Princeton study.
Oh, the Stanford prison experiment?
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I did an episode on that one too.
I think that's
a very good point, actually. Can you just give a bit of a basic?
I think that could lend some perspective here. So the final conclusions were that when people are given orders, they'll go and, you know, kind of silence that part of their brain, that conscience part of their brain, because they're doing what they've been told to create the best outcome, right? Even if it means brutality.
Yeah.
And so the study was actually, it was meant to go for 2 weeks and it was stopped after, 6 days? Some very small amount of time where the researchers just said, like, we can't do this anymore.
Because when you're in that state, your mind sort of changes and says that this is what's right.
Exactly. And so I'm wondering if that kind of thing kind of came into play for a lot of these soldiers.
I imagine it would be.
Especially anybody who had been Nazi youth, who was probably a lot at that time, because they were brainwashed by the government and the system. Not that that's any, you know, really legitimate excuse, but I mean, like, it definitely plays into it. I just, throughout this conversation, that kept coming into my mind, and I wanted to make a point on it.
That was kind of one of the thought processes behind starting that experiment. At least that was what they had mentioned. But I would point out that recently, if you haven't seen, I think it was in August of last year or September, there was stuff that came out that kind of surfaced that the guy who was behind it, Philip Zimbardo, pretty much told them what to do, and it was all kind of faked. And so there's a lot of people, and there was a lot of stuff that kind of surfaced from people that were as in the experiment that got interviewed, and they were like, yeah, he would pretty much kind of told us what to say and what to do. But I mean, that aside, it's still one of those things that, as far as in this scenario, it's one of those things that maybe it's valid. I mean, I don't know. It's unfortunate with the Stanford prison experiment that it's tough to say that is exactly what will happen, because that particular study was tainted in that way. But it's still fascinating that, you know, the in a horrible way, just, you know, what humans are capable of when they're subjected to just a little bit, you know, just a little bit of brutality, just a little bit of power, just a little bit more. And then, you know, you get to a point where you have these soldiers doing just horrific things that I would like to believe that any single one of them, if they had taken, you know, a year off or something and come back and just look at things with fresh eyes, be like, what are we doing?
Insane.
Like, this is just, you know, horrible stuff. What are we doing? But because they're in it day in, day out, and they're just, like you said, brainwashed from childhood, it's what they know. It's the life that they know.
In someone like Aman's case, I can see he definitely committed a lot of war crimes.
No, he was just an evil bastard.
Yeah, he did a lot of things that seemed to be quite accurate to what he was actually doing. I think, there's a lot of great actors in this, but I think Ralph Fiennes playing him, he's just a dick. Like, he's just menacing and creepy. And
crazy.
Yeah. I really like the way he plays him, though. Maybe this is a role that made him get to be Voldemort.
Yeah.
He was a very good villain, is my point.
I always say, if you absolutely hate somebody, that means that they're doing their job perfectly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, as an actor. And I definitely hated this guy.
For good reason.
I'd just be really curious to be blasé about it. The war ends, we all decide this was bad and that we should never do this again. But attitudes, especially prejudices and biases, die hard, right? So I just wonder, because it was so systematic and a whole generation felt this way about a group of people, I wonder what it was like for, you know, next generation Germans to deal with, say, grandparents or parents who had fought in the war and things like that, who still had some of these attitudes about Jews.
I imagine it's taken Germans in particular a long time to shake off this idea of after the war.
Well, and it must be so hard. I mean, because I've gone to school with a few different German classmates, and I didn't know how you would ever approach it. So, you know, you just like avoid it like the plague, the topic of any of the wars, because I mean, it's not just one, but 2 wars. The world hated them for 2 wars. You know what I mean? I just can't even imagine the weight that must hold
I'd like to think that they still teach it in school as if it's just another history class, and this is a thing that happened. We have to sort of accept it.
Yeah.
It's not like anyone in this classroom did it, you know what I mean? But we have to still acknowledge it. I hope that they do that. I'm sure that they will. Germany's pretty progressive.
I just wonder, say, because like my great-grandfather was in the war, and he was actually German. He fought for the Canadian Army. But I just wonder, if he had family in Germany and they had grandkids my age, how that would be for those grandkids and for those other people.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Just to be interacting and say, like, even after the war, you still might hate Jews. You know what I mean? I'm just curious what that interaction would be like.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, it's tough. I don't know. It was systemic for so long. I think you brought up a great point, Danielle, earlier about the World War I playing a big part in it. And a lot of what helped the Nazi Party rise to power was how Germany and the Treaty of Versailles and how it was essentially torn apart by the other Allied countries after the war. Germany's economy was just decimated to the point to where, everybody was poor and, there was, they were just under such heavy restrictions.
People would put money in their ovens and burn it because it was worth more that way. That's how bad the economy got after World War I because of how heavy the reparations payments were.
And so it was so easy for the Nazi Party just to have them to point and say, we're going to have this common enemy, and it's, that just develops into racism and kind of propping up. But that base part of just, we're going to do what we have to do to get out of this. Mm-hmm. And the Nazi Party just kind of grabbed onto that. And, here's a common enemy. They're the ones that did this to us, even though, they didn't. But, that was kind of the turning point there. And, it just kind of grew from there little by little.
Well, and Hitler actually came in and did a lot of good things for the economy. He came in and he really turned things around. So people were really ready to rally behind him. It's just, historically, it's a really fascinating example of how strong the economy can affect so many other things. How strongly those pressures can affect so many other things politically, socially, educationally.
Well, money drives everything, really.
Yeah. It was just absolutely just a really interesting example.
Just getting back to the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
You're right. No, it's a very important topic.
With so many facets, there's so much you can talk about because history played such an important role in shaping the events that, ultimately led to this being created. Sorry.
No, it's an important one. Like, people should be talking about it. I was watching Spielberg's acceptance speech of Best Picture for this one, and he said, if you take one thing out of it, I hope that all the educators out there teach this in schools, teach the Holocaust, because we should never forget it. And that's really the point of his film. He's trying to show people this is what actually happened, just in case you didn't know. Obviously, because it's very important to himself as a topic. I think it's a very long tone piece, because there are shots in there where it's just showing you what's happening. Like, there's not much of a story for large chunks of it. It's just like someone sitting there on a camera just filming this to this to this.
That said, it flows very
It does flow very well. And going back to black and white, the lighting, the opportunity that you get with lighting when it's just black and white is really quite impressive. There's quite a lot of scenes there with half of someone's face in the light and the other half in the darkness. Or when they're in a conversation, someone will just step in just the right place and their face will be illuminated. And it gives you these different senses and feelings as to what's happening in the scene and the way they're interacting. It's very clever.
I think it can definitely take you right back to feeling very human in doing that. You know what I mean? You get pure expression. There's not as much surrounding connotation because, like you say,
it definitely draws your eye out of the darker places.
And it kind of gets rid of all the surrounding noise and makes you focus just on that person or that object. And it, like you said, it creates an opportunity cinematographically that you just don't get with color. And I think I think it was a very smart choice on Spielberg's part, because you create these opportunities that you just wouldn't get with color.
It must have been very difficult to direct. Just being like trying to create this and storyboard it. Man, there must have been a lot of storyboards for a 3.5-hour movie.
Yeah. Normally, especially when you're trying to recreate things that actually happened in that way, and, in a way that looks a lot like archival footage, so you're trying to kind of direct it in that way too, of just in with the chaos and, bouncing around a lot in some shots, but then, knowing when to not go handheld. And
I think that's a good point with the black and white. I think it is meant to look like archival footage, even if it does trick your brain into some of the scenes. You're thinking, oh yeah, this is what I'm actually looking at.
Yeah,
because it is quite real.
That's an interesting point.
The scenes that get me the most are the ones that humanize it. The first one that you see is when they first get on the train and they're labeling all their suitcases. And then the very next scene, you see them just ransacking it and just chucking away all the shoes and pulling out all the jewelry and the teeth. And that's the first time you really see, oh, these people really mean nothing to them. And then it just gets worse from there, obviously. But that's the first time.
Well, and that particular scene really struck home for me because, like I said, my great-grandfather actually fought in the war. I never met him. He died when my dad was 11. But my Nana, that's her dad, always tells this story because he was involved in the liberation. He didn't talk about it much, but she tells a story that he told about a mountain of shoes. A mountain of shoes,
wow.
Right? Like, he actually saw that. And I get confused a little bit. I think the scene with the teeth really struck me too because she told me about that as well. So I'm just like, holy crap. You know what I mean? Like this, it just struck home for me a lot more because like someone who really is very close to me in terms like generationally was really affected by this, right? So it was just that particular scene for me was really, it really affected me. A few of the other ones really affected me too, and we'll get into that, but...
Well, you and I went to Mauthausen in Austria, and there's a little museum there, and I remember seeing a few of the photos there, and they show a lot of the clothes and bodies and things in the trenches, and when you go into the concentration camp, you have to pass these trenches, and you can't help but think, man, that's a lot of people that went through these gates.
And I just remember thinking, it's funny what a person remembers, right? The scene when the little boy goes and hides in the toilet. I remember that's exactly what those wash houses looked like.
Yeah.
Like, he was very historically accurate. Or like the watchtower over the entrance to the gate. That's exactly what that looked like. You know what I mean? It was just, he got it dead on in terms of set, for sure.
I wonder how many of the camps that he would have visited for that set design.
And I'm just wondering if he actually filmed at any of them.
I imagine that he might have parts of it, but surely he would have built quite a lot of it because Spielberg was quite big on that.
With them being more historical sites now, I would be surprised if they, pulled in a lot of extras and actually shot and stuff.
Yeah.
At the actual camps, I would expect that they would have revisited for sure, and recreated to minute details. But then they can do whatever they need to do to get the shot they need. Yeah,
because you would really have to just like put on the rain a lot and make it all muddy and put up the wires and quite a lot.
You don't want to damage the actual to get the shot.
Sitting here and actually thinking back to it, like just thinking back to when we visited that place, it is very, very accurate actually because Mauthausen kind of had everything.
Yes, it did have the gas chambers, it had the
crematorium, it had the barracks, it had everything. So it was kind of like a little...
There was a very big yard, just like there was shown in the movie.
It was a little microcosm of... Because it wasn't very big, but it had everything that you've ever been taught.
I imagine they were all a bit self-sustained, like they're all self-running.
I'm just thinking, though, like, even the architecture was... Like, in the movie, it was exactly the same. Like, I wonder if they were... standardized or anything for how they had to be built. I'm just now that I'm actually thinking about it, like it was exactly the same.
Do you have any idea as how many there actually were? I'm imagining like a dozen or so.
How many actual extermination camps?
Yeah.
Oh, that I'd have to look that up to be sure. But yeah, they were spread out across
Europe, yeah.
Across Europe. So, and there were more concentration camps, if I recall, than extermination camps, because they didn't all have
those facilities,
the gas chambers and the facilities for that. But there were way too many of them.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was more than one, so there's or there's that's not the right. There's more than zero. How's that?
Yeah.
So yeah, way too many of them for sure. I wonder, you were talking about the luggage, and that I had a thought about that. I wonder how much of that was to make the Jews go along with it easier, to make them think that they were going to get their stuff back, and we're just going on this train ride, and they don't know where to. Or how much of it was to hide what was going on to the German population. Because again, after the war, I know I'd seen interviews with people that lived in some of the cities, near Auschwitz and some of the camps, and they would talk about, the horrible smells and all this, but that they really had no idea
what it was,
what was going on. And I think that was, it's one of those things like, really? You didn't know? I mean, you're turning a blind eye to it, kind of the way we talked about with Schindler doing earlier. But I wonder how much of that was to almost make it seem to the rest of the Germans that, yeah, they're, getting rid of the Jews, and that's something that everybody was on board with, as you mentioned, Danielle, with, the girl who's, yelling, "Get out of here, Jews," that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if they didn't know that they were being sent off to die. They just thought that they were being sent to prison, or they were being sent, somewhere. I don't know. I was curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on, why else would they have them go and label everything, make sure that everything's labeled and all this kind of stuff.
I imagine it's a bit of both.
Yeah, so I think, initially, so that there wouldn't be as much resistance, absolutely, because why would you want to have more trouble than you need?
Well, just right? Like the story with the girl going into the showers, they're like, well, why do we need the soap? It's so because there wouldn't be resistance. It'd make you go in them easier.
Yeah, good point.
That was such a powerful scene, too. When... So they told the story, right? And they're like, that can't be true. They need us.
Well, actually, now that you say that, they never actually show any gassing in this whole movie. They show some of the chimneys, and they sort of assume that this is what happened. We don't have to show it. You know what I mean? Well,
and the thing too with when they're actually in the showers, I think that's so much more powerful that it was actually a shower, because you see. They know what's going to happen. They think they're going to be gassed. They've heard the stories. They're absolutely terrified, those women.
Especially when the lights shut off.
Yeah.
Oof. I couldn't imagine that.
No. Can you imagine the sense of relief you would have after that? My God. But, yeah, in terms of the suitcases and things, I think it was so that, they would have less resistance.
But if the general German population had no idea that that's actually quite an accomplishment, really, to be able to do little things like that and putting the labels on the thing just in the view of the public. It's really quite an accomplishment to keep up this image for so many years to get away with such a thing.
I think they may well have reached a point where people realized that something bad was happening to them, but I don't think they quite realized exactly what was happening.
Well, I think that's where Oscar was on at the beginning. He's like, I don't think it's going to be great for them, but I don't think they're being treated the way that they actually were.
I'm curious too, exactly when the Allies found out, because I remember making this point too when we were watching it, Brenton. Did they just figure it out when they got there? Because, there was a war going on, but there was a war going on mostly because Germany was going around and annexing the rest of Europe, not because they were killing Jews. People didn't realize they were doing that initially. The war was going on for a different reason. You know what I mean? So I'm just curious when...
I don't know, but I think that no one really knew until after the war, the extent of it at least. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure.
Yeah, a lot of it was when the camps were liberated, they started to realize what was going on. You know, the fact that there were camps there didn't necessarily mean that they knew that people were being exterminated there, because there were work camps, there were prisoner of war camps, there were a lot of different camps that
Existed.
got liberated. Again, it was war, and, you know, there was massive war efforts going on there across most of, you know, German occupied Europe. But I think it was kind of after the war, people started putting things together and started, you know, hearing some of the tales of things that were going on, and seeing that the facts were backing up those tales, and seeing even some of the documents. One of the reasons why the Third Reich is so heavily talked about, I think, other than, you know, the horrible things that they've done, is because when they collapsed, they destroyed a lot of documents, but there were still a lot of top secret documents and a lot of documents that were just made available. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that we can see a lot of the behind the scenes that you wouldn't normally get for a driving military force like that. And you can see a lot of that. And I think it takes some time to go through all of that, but eventually, you know, people started putting
the pieces
two and two together, that this is what's going on.
And it was actually a policy. It's crazy that and he says that in the movie too. He's like, this is a policy, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's easy to say that, you know, I was just doing what I was told to do. It's what the policy says. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, you mentioned the trains. When Itzek was on the train, and the soldiers there was like, oh, no, it's on the list. The list is correct. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to follow that list.
I mean, like, they can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they just follow to the letter of the law. And so just the danger in that of following.
Just being sheep. Following
things to such a level that, you know, it doesn't matter that, you know, all these people are going to die because the list can't be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think another very human moment that sort of gets me towards the end was when Schindler breaks down, and he has that little speech about, he looks at his car and he's like, I could have sold this and I could have saved more people. Mm-hmm. And he looks at the pin on his shirt and he's like, that's two people right there.
Yeah.
Or at least one. I could have saved another person. Like, I think that's something, even if Oscar wasn't saying that, I'm sure he was thinking it, mm-hmm. because I think that's a completely normal thing to think. Mm-hmm. And that just must have driven him nuts, just to think, what if there was something else? Because he did throw away a lot of money on booze and stuff.
And women and parties.
Yeah. And you just must be thinking to yourself, I could have done more. I think it's very important towards the end there. You get to see the actual Jews still alive and got to grow old, but it also has that footnote saying that there are 6,000 descendants of the Schindler Jews, which is really quite powerful, just to show that he did save more. Like, he really did make an impact.
And that's what Itzhak said. He said, there will be generations because of you.
Yeah.
There will be generations that live that wouldn't have lived, and they'll live because of you.
It's powerful.
It's very powerful. I tend to like war movies simply because they generally do exactly what they're supposed to do. Something that was hard for me, because there were a couple times when I had to look away from the TV. But it was just like, I appreciated that Spielberg didn't shy away from anything. Because you see sometimes in other movies with killing scenes that they'll kind of draw it out to make it suspenseful.
And dramatic, yeah.
Yeah, this wasn't. He really honed in on the fact that it was just like, psh, done.
I'll agree with that, because there are a few things in here where it's gruesome or it's violent, or even the nudity. Mm-hmm. It's necessary. And it's not overdrawn out. It's just what happened.
Exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that and his directorial choices. I really love Spielberg.
See, that's why
he does such a great job.
That's why I said earlier that it's more of just like a tone piece.
Yeah.
Because it's just sort of showing you from like a fly on the wall kind of perspective for a lot of these things, rather than making it the blockbuster view of it.
Yeah. No, I think he really just laid it out exactly how it was, and, you know...
almost as if it is archival footage.
Yeah, here's one person who really, really appreciated that. Yeah.
And I'm glad this is number 6, because it means that people have seen it and watched it. Hopefully it'll encourage more people to watch it and educate themselves on the whole topic.
I think we've covered it pretty well, you know? If anybody's listening to this and they haven't seen it yet, go watch it.
It's something you should watch. I think if you see this, you get a very good education about that. Because, I mean, did you cover this in school, Brenton?
I was trying to think of that, because I obviously knew the story before seeing movies like this, but I don't remember how I knew the story.
Okay, because in Canada, we covered it very extensively in school, like over many years. I remember doing projects and research on the Holocaust. What about you, Dan? Did you guys cover it in school?
Yeah, but not that extensively. It was, almost one of those things where, this happened and you hear the sheer numbers and you hear the dates and you hear the details of it, and it's not humanized nearly in the way that it is in this movie, where it's, millions of people dying. It's like, okay, there's millions of people that died. It was war and millions of people died. But no, these millions of people died needlessly. And these, like you're saying with, the shoes, feet used to fill those shoes, and just imagining that, and just this movie does a great job of humanizing all of that to really bring it home.
And that's why I think people should really see this movie and should see other war movies like this one and Saving Private Ryan in particular. I think if you want to learn about the war just from movies, watch those movies.
See, that's an interesting comparison, because they are both Spielberg.
Well, he did it so well.
He's very good at the war movies, isn't he?
And if you want to learn about it and really feel like you kind of know what they went through a little bit, I think those are two really great movies.
I think Saving Private Ryan does more of that lingering on the death shot and making it more big blockbuster Hollywood kind of feel than Schindler's List does. Which is fine, because you can have one side or the other. I don't think Saving Private Ryan's meant to be based on something.
Well, the part that really makes it feel that way for me is the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. I don't think I've ever seen any other war movie that hits the nail so well on the head, for how it must have felt. That was very touching for me. Yeah. That introductory scene.
I just think they're two very different war films.
They are very different movies. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for joining us, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If you want to check out my episode on this, you can find it at basedonatruestorypodcast.com.
We have been Danielle and Brenton this week. Thanks for joining us. Feel free to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or comment on SoundCloud. And until next week, thanks for listening.